If you're a shot blocker, that doesn't bother you. Just wait for the next opportunity, which I'm pretty sure he got me back at some point in time. But to be able to do that to him, that was gratifying. My favorite number was 45, and his favorite number was 45. When I first came to Houston, I did not understand how far basketball would take me. I was still learning the game. I was learning the country. I was learning myself. And because of that, I watched people very carefully. Some players impress you because they could score. Some impress you because of their size or their speed. But the truly great players did something different. They changed the decisions everyone else had to make. You felt them before they even touched the ball. That is what I remember most now. I played with great players. I played against great players. I saw young men who would later become names known everywhere. But when we were in college, none of us knew exactly what was coming. We were simply competing, trying to improve, trying to win. If I had to choose 5 college players who showed me what greatness really looked like, these are the 5 I will remember. And I will begin with a man I did not have to study from a distance. I saw him every day. Number 5, Clyde Drexler, Houston. When I think about Clyde, the first thing I remember is movement. He never seemed to be in a hurry, but somehow he was already down the floor before everybody else understood what was happening. I was still learning so much about basketball then. There were moments in practice when I would simply watch him and try to understand his timing. Clyde taught me something very early. Speed is not only about how fast your legs move. It is about how quickly you recognize what the game is giving you. That was his gift. A rebound will come off the rim, and before I could even think about where the defense was, Clyde had already made his decision. He could turn one loose ball into an attack almost immediately. When somebody like that is beside you, you begin seeing the court differently. You start looking farther ahead. People remember Slama Jama because of the dunks. I understand that. It was exciting basketball, and we enjoyed playing that way. But inside our team, it felt more serious than the nickname. We believed we could win everything. The season in 1983 still stays with me because we came so close. We had Clyde, we had confidence, and by the time we reached the national championship game against North Carolina State, there was a feeling that all the work had brought us to the place we were supposed to be. Then basketball reminded us that it does not owe anybody an ending. The game stayed close. Every possession became heavier. North Carolina State would not disappear. We kept attacking, kept believing, and then the final seconds came. 54-52. I can still remember how quickly a loud building can become quiet inside your own head. People have replayed the final play many times. They remember the ball near the rim and the celebration afterward. What I remember is walking away knowing how narrow the distance could be between becoming a champion and carrying a lesson for the rest of your life. Clyde was part of that lesson. I had seen him in practice when there were no cameras. I had watched how naturally the game came to him and how his energy could pull the rest of us forward. That mattered to me more than the highlights. Years later, people would know Clyde for many other things. I still see the young man running beside me in Houston. Putting him at number 5 does not make him smaller in my memory. It only tells you how deeply the next 4 men affected the way I came to understand greatness. And the next one taught me that sometimes the quietest player on the floor can control the biggest game. Number 4, James Worthy, North Carolina. The thing I remember about James was how little he seemed to waste. No wasted movement, no wasted possession. No need to tell you that he belonged on that stage. When Houston met North Carolina in the Final Four in 1982, I was still very young in the game. Everything was happening fast for me then. I was learning what pressure felt like, learning how different basketball became when every possession carried the weight of a season. James looked comfortable in that kind of game. That stayed with me. There are players who announce themselves. They demand the ball, they make you feel their personality, and sometimes that is exactly what a team needs. James was different. He could let the game come to him, and then when the opening appeared, he was already there. That requires patience. And patience is harder than people think. North Carolina had so much talent. Sam Perkins was there. Michael Jordan was a freshman. James was surrounded by players who could hurt you in different ways, so you could never relax your attention in one direction. That was part of the problem. You would make one adjustment and another player would find space. You would protect one area and suddenly James was cutting into another. He did not need to dominate every possession to control what you were thinking about. The game remained close. That is what I remember most clearly. It never felt like North Carolina had escaped from us. We were still there, still fighting, still believing we could turn it. But late in a Final Four game, small decisions become very large. North Carolina made enough of the right ones. They beat us 68-63. At that age, losing hurts before it teaches you anything. You walk off the floor thinking about what you should have done differently. You replay possessions. You remember places where one step, one rebound, one decision might have changed the night. Later, you begin to see more. I began to understand what James had shown me. Greatness did not always have to look like somebody forcing himself into the center of the game. Sometimes it was knowing when to move, when to wait, when to attack, and when to trust the other four men beside you. North Carolina went on to win the championship. People can look back now and see James Worthy, Michael Jordan, all those famous names together. At the time, we were simply young men trying to survive one more game. That is why James remains number 4 for me. I remember the calm more than anything else. And strangely enough, on that same North Carolina team was a younger player who would eventually make the entire basketball world rethink what greatness could become. Number 3, Michael Jordan, North Carolina. It is strange to remember Michael before the world knew what Michael Jordan would become. When we met North Carolina in the Final Four in 1982, he was still a freshman. James Worthy was the established name on that team. Sam Perkins was there. Michael was the younger player, the one still beginning to make his way. But he did not play like someone waiting for permission. That is what I noticed. Some young players enter a big game and spend the first few minutes trying to settle themselves. You can almost see them measuring the moment. Michael seemed to do the opposite. The bigger the stage became, the more comfortable he looked stepping into it. I did not know then where his career would go. None of us did. We were simply trying to beat North Carolina. That night, Michael scored 18 points against us. But when I think back, the number's not what stays with me. I remember the confidence. He attacked without looking rushed. When an opening appeared, he went into it as if he had already decided what would happen before the rest of us had finished reacting. There is something unusual about seeing that in a freshman. The game was close enough that every possession mattered. We were trying to stay attached to them, trying to find the small advantage that might turn the night our way. North Carolina had too many different answers. Worthy could punish you. Perkins could change the floor. And then there was this young guard who seemed completely unafraid of making a mistake. That matters in March. Fear can make a good player hesitate for half a second. Half a second is enough. North Carolina beat us 68-63. And at the time, I walked away thinking mostly about Houston, what we had missed, what I could have done better, what another possession might have changed. Only later did I understand some of what I had seen. People now look backward and attach everything Michael became to that young man in Carolina blue. 6 championships, the famous shots, the reputation, all of that came later. I cannot pretend I looked across the court that night and saw the future. I did not. What I saw was a freshman who did not seem intimidated by the present. That is more interesting to me now. Greatness sometimes arrives before the accomplishments that explain it. You see a certain refusal to shrink when the game becomes uncomfortable. Michael had that very early. That is why he is number 3. But there was another player from those years whose college career was so overwhelming that on achievement alone, he could easily have been at the top of this list. His name was Ralph Sampson. Number 2, Ralph Sampson, Virginia. The first time you watched Ralph carefully, you had to change the picture you carried in your mind of what a big man was supposed to be. That was what stayed with me. There had been great centers before him, of course, but Ralph could move in ways that did not seem to belong to someone with that kind of size. He was comfortable away from the basket. He could put the ball on the floor. He could make a decision before the defense had finished adjusting to where he was. For a young center still learning the position, that was important to see. I was still discovering what I could become at Houston. My game was raw. I depended on instinct, quickness, effort. Ralph was already showing something more complete. His greatest quality to me was presence. You felt him even when he did not touch the ball. A guard would turn the corner and see Ralph waiting near the basket, and suddenly the decision changed. A pass that seemed open disappeared. A shot that normally felt comfortable became something you thought about twice. That is control. When Houston played Virginia, I remember being aware of him in a way that was different from most players. You could not simply play your own game and hope everything would work itself out. Ralph made you think. That is one of the first signs of greatness I learned to recognize. The very best players make their opponents change. Virginia beat us, and I left that experience with more questions about my own game than answers. At that age, I did not enjoy that feeling. Nobody does. You want to believe you are ready. Sometimes another player shows you that you are not. Years later, life did something strange. Ralph and I became teammates in Houston. Now I could see him from the other side. I could watch how he prepared, how he understood space, how difficult it was for a defense to deal with two big men who could move. The player I had once studied from across the court was standing beside me. That changes your understanding of someone. People can look at Ralph's college career and understand immediately why his name belongs here. He was honored again and again because night after night, teams built their plans around stopping him and still struggled to do it. If this list were decided only by college dominance, I would have a very difficult time putting anybody ahead of Ralph Sampson. Very difficult. But that is not the only thing I am measuring. There is one player left whose greatness became tied to the most important game of my college life. A player who stood between Houston and the one thing we wanted more than anything. Patrick Ewing. Number one, Patrick Ewing, Georgetown. With Patrick, I never had to search very hard for the memory. It is still there. When you played against Georgetown in those years, you understood very quickly that the paint belonged to Patrick before the game even began. He did not need to block every shot. That was never the point. The important thing was that you knew he could. That knowledge changed decisions. A guard would drive one step deeper and suddenly pull the ball back. A big man would catch it near the basket and hesitate before turning. Passes that normally seemed available became dangerous. Patrick controlled space. That is one of the highest forms of greatness for a center. Ralph Sampson has shown me how completely one player could dominate college basketball. Patrick showed me something slightly different. He could change the behavior of an entire team without needing the ball in his hands. And then came 1984. Houston had already been through the pain of losing the national championship the year before. People remember North Carolina State in the final play. We remembered much more than that. We remember walking away without the championship. So when we returned to the final against Georgetown, it felt like another opportunity had been placed in front of us. You do not assume you will get many of those. I certainly did not. There was pressure around that game, but inside the game there was something more basic. Georgetown was physical, they were disciplined, they trusted one another, and in the middle of all of it was Patrick. Every time we tried to establish something near the basket, his presence became part of the decision. That is difficult to explain to someone who only watches highlights. Defense is not always the play that ends with a block shot. Sometimes defense is a shot that never gets taken. Sometimes it is the pass that goes somewhere else because a player has already decided he does not want to challenge what is waiting near the rim. Patrick created those moments. Georgetown beat us 84-75. When the game ended, I did not stand there thinking about rankings or legacies. I was young. I was disappointed. I wanted that championship very badly. We had come back for it, and it was gone. Years soften certain things, but they also make other things clearer. I can now look back at that night without needing to protect my pride. Georgetown deserved the championship. They played like a complete team, and Patrick was at the center of the way they understood themselves. That matters when I compare him with the other four men on this list. Clyde showed me how one player could accelerate an entire team. James showed me that calm could be a weapon. Michael showed me how early competitive courage can reveal itself. Ralph showed me the height of individual dominance in college basketball. Patrick gave me something from all of those ideas. Talent, yes, but also discipline, control, trust from his teammates. And when the game became the biggest game of our college lives, he was still exactly who Georgetown needed him to be. That is why I put him ahead of Ralph. If I were only measuring awards and individual dominance, I could make a very strong case for Ralph at number one. but I am remembering basketball the way I experienced it. Patrick stood in the middle of the game that meant the most to me, and his presence helped determine how that game had to be played. I never won an NCAA championship. For many years, that bothered me. Now I understand that some losses stay with you because they become part of your education. Patrick Ewing was part of mine. After all these years, if you ask me which college player left the deepest mark on the way I understood greatness, my answer has not changed. Patrick is number one. When I look back now, I do not see 5 names on the list. I see 5 different lessons. Clyde taught me how one man's energy could change the speed of an entire team. James taught me that calmness could be just as dangerous as athleticism. Michael showed me that courage sometimes appears before a young man has the achievements to explain it. Ralph showed me how completely one player could shape the game around his presence. And Patrick showed me what it meant to stand at the center of the biggest moment and remain true to who you were. I was fortunate to see all of that while I was still learning. At the time, I did not think of it that way. I wanted to win. I wanted to improve. I wanted the championship that Houston came so close to touching. That is what young players do. You believe the game is asking you to prove yourself. Later, you understand that the game was teaching you. I never left college with an NCAA championship. For a long time, that felt like something unfinished. But age gives you another way of looking at these things. The victories mattered. The losses mattered too. So did the men standing beside me and across from me. They helped shape the player I eventually became, even when neither they nor I understood it at the time. That is why greatness to me has never been only about what a man puts in the record book. It is also about what remains in the people who had to play the game with him. The scoreboard eventually goes dark. What a great player leaves in you does not